we use Facebook and Twitter, and we use the internet and email communication generally, and we put it up on YouTube, and we do Google. It's available on Google and YouTube. We make it available to all of those who do the show with us, so that if I have somebody from an organization on and we're dealing with civil liberties issues, they put it on their website and it spreads. We try to get it to spread as virally as possible. What we do is take individual topics and work them, and then we work the show to work it into an audience. Abu Dhabi gives us the platform, but it's only useful to the degree to which we actually can build a community out of it. And sometimes the community isn't built the day the show is on, although it's live on a number of networks in the States, but it becomes the community you build after the show is out. Al Jazeera obviously can't do that because it's on live 24/7 and has way too much content to work in that way. I know that the website is viewed, and I think that that's important. I'm just not sure of the clarity of the mission that warrants the expense that you put into it. And that's the issue that I would, if you have lots of money and you can spend lots of money, you can do almost anything and then have the fun to reshape it every couple of years. And the question is it a success? That's something quite different. As long as there is a Congress, Al-Hurra will have money, and Al-Hurra will be able to buy talent and do things. Is it a success? That's a different story. And I think the answer is it's not. And I'm not quite sure that in the United States we could say Al Jazeera is a success, and I also don't think it will be a success because I'm not sure that there's an audience for it to have, that it can enter a large enough audience to shape and in any way impact news.
Well, I would say just that Al-Hurra's main success, and I say this as an editor who assigned people to investigate Al-Hurra several years ago, ran one of the first investigations of the money that Al-Hurra was wasting and the corruption that was involved in staffing it during the Bush administration. This is a recurring story, as Jim knows. Every once in a while, some other news organization investigates Al-Hurra and finds that it's a complete failure. It has no audience, and I think it's not fair to compare Al Jazeera to that. What Al Jazeera succeeds in doing, even though I agree with Jim, it has a very small American audience, at least for its broadcasts, and I would not presume to say it is the voice of the Arab world, because I can't say that. But I would say it is certainly perceived that way in much of the West and in much of the Arab world, is my understanding, that it is perceived as the legitimate voice of certainly much of the Arab world. I don't know that it's perceived as a voice of Africa or Latin America yet, but it's certainly perceived as a voice of the Arab world. And for that reason, it has influence, as I said, among diplomats, but also as a place where you would go if you were me or any number of other reporters in the United States or in the West, to find out what people in the Arab world are thinking, what they're listening to, what message they are receiving, what the varieties of opinion in the Arab world may be, because I know Al Jazeera endeavors to present more than one opinion on controversy.
I think, Joe, the question that's being raised, though, is the disconnect between that Al Jazeera that you're talking about and the Al Jazeera International, that rather self-consciously doesn't want to be the English version of Al Jazeera. Isn't that right?
The English version of Al Jazeera Arabic,
Yeah.
I mean. I don't think it's right to be the English version to Al Jazeera Arabic, or we would have done a translation only, and we didn't do a translation. Yeah. It is the spirit of Al Jazeera Arabic interpreted worldwide, and the spirit of Al Jazeera Arabic is challenging, daring, doesn't take anything as given, and see the world from different perspective. Okay. You have all the international news organization getting Western terminology, seeing Western point of view of all the issues in the world, and there is the rest of the world. We are talking about 10% of the world vis-a-vis 90%. We are looking at this 90%, how do they see the world, and then broadcast it and create that kind of global understanding. That's our aim. A part of it is how the world can see the Arab world as well. And that's a part that we are keen on, and we want to be the best in covering it and transmitting it as well.
Adil, please help us all understand what's happening here.
It's a trying task, I would say. But if I were to chime in into this conversation, I would actually go back and try to really question and problematize what it means to have an Arab perspective. You know, so if Al Jazeera English is going to take an Arab perspective that apparently exists in Al Jazeera, the Arab station, which is controversial in every sense of the word. I mean, there are few people that will agree that Al Jazeera's coverage in Arabic to the Arab world is something that we can all be unanimous about, let alone if it were to broadcast in another language. So coming to terms with what constitutes an Arab perspective is a problem as it is. And in some ways, the real sort of core value that underlies what makes Al Jazeera an Arab station is the fact that it communicates in the Arabic language. So I mean, the gentleman here raised the question of, you know, what it means to cross that divide, you know, and actually discard the language. I mean, the fear of losing the language and reaching out to communicating with a different lexicon, with a different vernacular altogether. What does that do to the actual, you know, the meaning and the identity of a station? So in some respects, I think what it's done is, or the venture, the experiment that is Al Jazeera English and Al Jazeera International, its value actually comes from the fact that it's redefined the boundaries of what it means to be Arab. I mean, we have 50 million Arabs living outside of the Arab world. What do they mean? I mean, okay, very few of them happen to live in the United States, surprisingly. So we have to think of this in a very multipolar perspective. We have more Arabs living outside of, who live outside. Most of them do not live in the United States, and so therefore it would be a misjudgment to assume that just because Al Jazeera Arabic reflects a quote-unquote Arab perspective to Arabs who live in the diaspora, that ends up falling on deaf ears in the United States, that somehow it lacks any value whatsoever. So I would like to go back and kind of revisit that. In addition, I also want to kind of raise the issue of what it means for Al Jazeera to be successful in the United States. It appears to be, I mean, of course, this is an outsider's perspective, but it appears to me that whenever Al Jazeera English is actually accessible to audiences, whether it's in the United States or anywhere, that they tend to find and they tend to find some degree of solidarity with it. The interesting example is a very, very small case study in Burlington, Vermont, where the local cable station decided to pull the plug, and this is one of only 3 markets in the United States where Al Jazeera English is available, decided to pull the plug on Al Jazeera English, and there was an outpouring of support on the part of a community that very few happened to be of Arab descent, and they ended up putting back the station on air on the Burlington Cable Company. The same thing happened in Canada when the Canadian Radio and Television Commission decided to call for, made a call for contributions and commentary to determine whether or not Al Jazeera English should be available on Canadian cable. And they got somewhere in the range of 2,000 positive responses, many of which never came from Arab Canadians. And so here the question is it important for Al Jazeera to continue to be the voice of the Arab world, Al Jazeera English to be a voice of the Arab world, and what are the downsides to that? If Al Jazeera English, as Mr. Salah said, if their objective, if their goal and their motivation and aspiration is to communicate on behalf of the global south and reverse the flow of information, then inadvertently they will be communicating on behalf of the Arab world, since we reside in the global south.
Thank you, عادل. سنفتح المجال الآن للحضور للمشاركة، إما بأسئلة أو مداخلات أو تحفظات لأحد من المشاركين أو لهم جميعا. وسنبدأ بأخونا الفاضل الجالس في المقدمة هنا. الميكروفون لو سمحت.
دكتور محمد صادق، أستاذ جامعي وكاتب وإعلامي من كلية الإمارات للتكنولوجيا. سيدي، يبدو لي وأظن يوافقني العديد والكم الأكبر من هذه رجال الإعلام والسياسة أن قناة الجزيرة هي الأول عربياً بامتياز، مع الاحترام الشديد لكل القنوات العربية والحرة وقناة أبو ظبي إلى آخر هذه القنوات الراقية المتميزة. أما الحديث عن المقارنة التي تفضل بها الأستاذ الكريم فيما بين الجزيرة والحرة،